You franchise your business, you're now a franchisor, you're learning franchising, and you want to grow. How do you do it right? What's the best strategy? What are the mistakes to avoid? And how can you win at franchising? I'm pleased to welcome a really good friend, Brent Dowling, CEO of Raintree, which is one of the best franchise development companies in the country. So welcome, Brent.
Thank you, Charles. Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
So Brent, for our viewers, our subscribers, we're going to leverage some really good best practices. For anyone out there, go check out Raintree's website. But Raintree helps franchise companies grow. And what I like about the conversation and what we can get from Brent is Brent and his organization is very strategic how they grow brands. And there's so many franchisors out there, so many people that franchise their business, they never gain traction. And worse, Brent, they go through a cycle, 1, 2, 3 years where they keep doing the same things, or they do what everyone else is doing, and they don't ever seem to gain traction. So Brent, if we started off today and you're a new franchisor, but you have this exceptional knowledge of everything that Raintree's developed and what you know as a franchise developer, what's some of the advice you give to new franchisors?
Ooh, if I was to start again knowing what I know now, it's a good question. I am a franchisor. I have a brewery franchise, and I think I came in a little late. I came in when they had 3 franchisees, and we ran from there. But I think if we were to do that again, I think there's a common rhetoric out there that you need X amount so you set up your franchise and you need a war chest of X to go and fund the development, the marketing, the sales of it, right? And finding and recruiting franchise owners. I don't actually know that that's the case. If I was to do it again, I would focus my entire energies, and this is actually something I tell to all the brands we represent, and even folks that don't, that just ask. And it's the same answer now, which is I would use all of my energy once my docs was set up, once my franchise was set up, to use my own internal organic network. They are where you'll often find your best franchisees, when you already know them, when they're in your network. And they're free. You don't have to spend thousands and thousands to go and market to those folks. If you find the right ones, as long as they have the skill sets, they're going to give you great feedback. They're going to give you the information you need to really understand how you need to improve as a franchisor and how you need to improve your business model. So, that's the first thing. I think the best franchisees come from your own network. And I think a lot of franchisors get so excited once they get the FDD out and the ops manual out and they want to run and have their brand out in the marketing and in consultant groups. When I feel like, again, if I was to do it again, I'd slow down and do it very efficiently.
Brent, and this is a conversation we have often with our clients, and I use the term seasoning. And I explain to them, hey, we're going to be franchising your business, whether it's a 90-day process or whatever that process is to legally become a franchisor. But what we coach them on all the time is that view this first year and even a significant portion of the next year as sort of that seasoning phase where you're focused on exactly what you're advising, which is we tell them just focus on your organic contacts, your organic reach. But also so you're marketing or you're communicating with people that know your brands, could be good fit franchisees. And then as part of the seasoning process, we coach them on really building out their brand itself, the franchise sales website, the value proposition, all the things that are going to take time and need to evolve. And really in that first year, we call it a seasoning process. And I think your advice is go after those organic contacts and make that your primary focus.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from there, once you do that, right, maybe you get 1 or 2. This is something, it's our biggest fear at Raintree, right? We bring in folks that are, and we've seen it before, and luckily only once, and it was 8 years ago, and we haven't made the same mistake again. But, I got a team, I'm lucky enough to work with the best franchise sales and marketers, I believe, in the industry. And when they go with a brand, it can go real quick. And you can grow pretty fast. And I think if there's major holes in your support program, in your own skill sets as a franchisor, and you don't find those out till you've already got 10 or 20 people opening, stores, it could be a bad time. And so part of that going slow and not needing to go out and do 10 or 20 in the first 12 months since deciding you want to be a franchisor is get that 1 or 2 or 3 up running and really make sure that you understand again your deficiencies, where you're good at, what you're good at, ensuring that the basics are in place, that the unit level economics work, that you've been able to replicate it across different models, that you can support at all the major functions. And we all know what those are. But that's part of not only just it's more affordable to find franchisees that way, but I think it's more responsible to go slow for that first year, understand your deficiencies, and then be in a position to figure out who in this industry can help you fill them. If you find them out too late, it can cripple brands and they can never recover from it too. So it's all part of the initial, I believe, go slow in the first 12 months.
And building that organic base and naturally those first 3 franchisees that you're talking about, their experience and whether or not they validate and are satisfied and their unit level economics are going to impact the franchise system for years, right? It's going to impact item 19 and where we grow.
Absolutely.
So Brent, startup brands, which I think the advice is so perfect, and any startup franchisor or struggling franchisor out there, really listen to the advice in terms of the organic reach of your brand, those first 3 franchisees. So, and aligning your support and how you're going to grow your system. What are some of the mistakes, the brands, and I know a ton of brands reach out to you, and you guys are very selective in who you can work with and who you can help. But when a struggling franchisor reaches out to Raintree, what are some of the friction points or obstacles that you see or mistakes they're making that unfortunately you can only take on so many brands, but what are you guys looking for when you evaluate a brand?
Yeah, we're looking for a few things. Unit level economics would be most important, right? So people are in franchises, sure, for freedom, for all these types of things, more time with family, but it's still a business and it still has to make sense. So we're looking for pretty strong financials that we can defend and know that they'll hold up well in this market against other franchisors. The big one we've learned too is really looking for strong brand differentiation, the unique selling proposition, the competitive advantage, whatever you want to call it, but making sure that the brand knows how they're different or better to their competitors in the market. That has to be there. When it's not there, your marketing and your lead generation, it becomes so much more complex and difficult. So that would be the second thing. The third thing is, for most of the brands, I would say 9 out of 10 have at least a small group of franchisees. We've worked with a couple brands that didn't have them. We just love the model, the founders, the economics so much, we're still able to take them on. But for most brands, we want to see at least a couple franchisees in the door. And we want to validate with them to understand their experience. Are they well supported? Is it meeting or exceeding their financial expectations? And ultimately, would they do it again? And so they're the big 3 of the things that we look for in a brand before we bring them in. Which is
a great formula, right? So unit level economics, brand differentiation, validation, right? And so let's dive into those, Brent, just a little. Unit level economics, we're dealing with emerging franchisors. Naturally, the major evaluation point is item 19, financial performance representations in the FDD. So when you're evaluating the unit economics, what are some of the things you guys are looking at?
Yeah, it varies typically by the investment level. So the higher the investment of the brand, the longer the ROI and acceptable ROI is going to be. So in the service, we work with service brands, say brands under $100,000. In this market, we really are looking for something that has a 12 to 18 month ROI, which seems aggressive, but the fact is that's out there and that's what you're competing against. As you start to move into something more retail-based, where the investment level's higher, we start to see that you can still have wild success at a 2, 3, even 4-year ROI. And that's because there are a few different variables in there to actually owning something more tangible like a retail franchise. But ultimately, that's what we want to see, anywhere from a 18-month ROI to a 4-year ROI. When I'm going through and typically one of the stages in our evaluation process is we ask to review the P&Ls of corporate locations and the franchisees. And I get pretty nervous if I don't see at least a 15% net and bottom line across the board. And right now, we really love to see 20% plus. Is if you've got that, we know that you're sitting on something that has enormous potential. So Charles, there's not a one size fits all. I think some folks think that there's some magic formula to what companies like Raintree look for, or even private equity look for. It's different every time, but there's some of the things that we try and sniff out.
So, Brent, but that framework's so helpful for franchisors because I don't think they're getting the right coaching and understanding those points. And I could tell you all of the time, especially where I see certain websites produced or certain companies that franchise, quote unquote, franchise businesses, they're not focused on these unit level economics. They're focused on insignificant macroeconomic factors like, that the business is in a $50 billion industry. Or what's worse, I'll see them focus on what the startup cost is, but not make the connection to what the ROI is. And so for the brands out there, Brent's advice or your insights into what you're evaluating is critical, which is investment levels critical, right? So what's that estimated startup expense? So as a franchisor, you need to know what sandbox you're playing in or what field you're playing on, which is if you're a service-based brand, then you should be focused on a lower startup cost in theory, quicker ROI. Retail-based business, ROI is going to take a couple of years to come along. And there's more leeway there, I think, because service-based is selling and it's very active, where retail-based business is generated from that retail location. So these are great economic factors. When you 15 to 20% plus on the P&Ls, you're referring to cash flow, EBITDA?
Correct.
So which, for the brands listening to this webinar, do a deep dive in your P&Ls, your franchisee P&Ls, have conversations with your franchise council about your item 19, and can you demonstrate this data, right? And then when you look at your website, as long as you get the legal approval, are you communicating the factors where a franchisee candidate can really make the connection with the ROI and really demonstrate that? Because Brent, you mentioned as core criteria, but I feel like there's so many brands that aren't even focused on this data.
Yeah, and it's not surprising to me. You see such high numbers of franchise brands enter, but also exit franchising every year. I think last time I checked, it's somewhere pretty remarkably around 300 in, 300 out. And I think you find what we see is once brands reach a certain stage of maturity, they're starting to hire up seasoned franchise folks in operations, and certainly things like financial coaching for franchisees. That's when a lot of brands will start to understand the need for really strong fiscal management coaching, understanding their own numbers, understanding how they might be able to improve them so they can coach the franchisees the same. And I think that realization happens too late for too many brands. I think the brands that win are the founders that have that innate understanding of, I've got a business model. It's a living, breathing thing. I have to feed it. I have to understand it. I have to react to the environment around me and how I can improve it and increase those margins, top line or bottom line or both. And I think that's probably a big reason you see so many brands exit, Charles, is they just fall in love with the idea of, well, my concept's the only one of its kind. And wow, my brand is so beautiful and people are going to love it. When the reality is, it's just not enough.
Well, Brent, so the most difficult thing that I experience, I'll get a call from someone who, and I'm not even reluctant to say this because I'm kind of offended in the sense that, so I'll get a call and someone will tell us, hey, things are just not right. The people we worked with, they're nice people, but we may want to work with your team, or could you give us some advice? And I lift up the hood, and what I find so many times, Brent, is they worked with what typical scenario will have, they worked with a franchise developer, they paid a fixed fee, they're told by the franchise developer, we cover everything from A to Z, legal, accounting, everything else, marketing. The most difficult part about that conversation is that the individuals that franchise their business didn't do it with the right understanding and really with the right planning framework. In some cases, Brent, we're contacted by people who they franchise because they're cold called by the franchise developer. And I get this a lot. And then what happens next in my conversation is, can I take a look at your item 19? And then they don't have one. And then the next part of the conversation is, did you have a conversation as to why it's important and whether it's there? And I'll get one of two things. One, the numbers weren't good enough, so they don't have one. And then I politely explain, you're not ready for franchising, or no one looked at the numbers and they're really good. And so it's not these franchisors' fault. It's just that their mindset entering the franchise world is a very different one than what it should be. I see that a lot. So, I mean, that really gets to the unit level economics. And what's interesting is there's some amazing brands out there. I mean, one was a restaurant, very small, over 1.6 million in gross sales, no item 19. So they didn't have that coaching framework. They didn't have a team like Raintree or my team. So, Brent, that's unit level economics, right? So we have some KPIs we're looking at: ROI, estimated investment, EBITDA, cash flow. The second thing that you mentioned was brand differentiation that you look for in franchisors. So I'll frame this conversation by, if you're a franchisor, you really need to focus on those brand differentiators. It's funny because if someone is in, just say, the junk removal industry, many times they'll say, well, there's really no differentiator because we all do the same thing. And I'm like, well, then that's the wrong mindset, right? And if you don't have that differentiator, and it could be you as the founder, right? It could be a bunch of things. Then you're not ready to franchise. So what are you guys looking at or looking for in those differentiators?
Yeah, it's a good point to your analogy or example of junk removal. I think your answer is absolutely right. There's always a differentiator. Sometimes you have to look within and create it. And but the worst thing you can do is just come out there and say nothing or do nothing and assume you're the same. You've got no advantage over your competition. So I think it's the same argument as, well, my numbers weren't good enough for an item 19. Or I don't really have a brand advantage. They're probably two really big clues that maybe you should press the brake on franchising, just because they're both as important as the other. For us, we really do like unique concepts, but that doesn't mean that it has to be, the only brand in its segment. Certainly not. I just find that brands that have done that work, that internal evaluation of where has this success come from, and part of that evaluation is kind of doing informal type of SWOTs. They're looking at their competitors. They understand their landscape, and they understand how potentially their customers find their model better. And there's brands that won't even go to that level of learning their customers, learning what their customers want and need. This all goes back into brand, understanding brand competitive advantage. And for us, it's more than just we get to say this on our marketing for it. Again, to me, it's an indicator that the brand's done their homework in many different realms and is truly ready to franchise. So for that reason, it's got to buy dual role of importance. One is, yes, it makes our job easier, especially when your attention span as a potential franchise buyer is shrinking by the day to a few seconds. You've got to have a really powerful statement, sentence, dot points on why this over the other 3,500 franchises. But again, it also, if we're talking on the subject of what we look for in evaluating a brand, we're looking for brands that are truly ready, and that allows us to understand if we think they are.
So I love the connection you're making between brand differentiators and doing their homework, right? Because on surface level, in a traditional business, there doesn't seem to be differentiators or, right? But if you do that SWOT analysis, if you do the deeper dive, really focus potentially on the founder's story, the motivation behind the brand, that customer engagement and what you do for customers, it does show that they're ready if they make that analysis, but it's only in that deep dive that you really get to the brand differentiators. And what I found is that it's not a big thing. It's the little things that you mine out of the business and what it does and how unique it is. One thing that comes up often, or I'll try to explain to some of our clients when they'll ask me to take a look at their website, and we'll talk about brand differentiators. But even before we get to that, Brent, one of the things I bring up is, hey, when a franchisee candidate comes to your website, two major questions are going to be, what do you do? And can I do it? Right? And it's an important job to show them, you can do this, and this is how we help you do it, right? These are the tools along the way, and not that generic, training nonsense that's on almost every website, and how do you help? So I find the differentiators are in the vision of, how we help the franchisee succeed, that transformation, those tools that are going to come along the way, that's on the franchisee end, and then also on the consumer end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, honestly, I do think the best clues come from the customers themselves, right? In terms of what matters. Oftentimes, what we think moves our brand and makes it special is not what it actually is. And the only person that gets to have that final say of what makes your brand different or better as to why someone would spend money with it is from the perspective of the customer. I know with my own company at Raintree here, I used to think that we were getting the attention and winning some partnerships with brands because X and Y. And it was only years later that I started to dive in, and we were doing some deep dive in our own business, where I was calling some founders of other franchise brands and asking the question, hey, why did you choose to reach out to us and no one else? And the answers surprised me. They weren't what I thought our primary brand competitive advantages were. And so that's, a little thing that we've at least learned along the way is, man, your customers tell your story. If you're struggling, if you're sitting here watching this thinking, is my brand competitive advantage strong enough? Or what is it? It's always so simple. It's go ask your customer.
Yeah, that's great advice. And you're actually just motivating me thinking, why, or when was the last time I've done that with a client?
It's hard to do it, isn't it? It's just one of those things.
It is. And we always think about maybe surveys and whatnot, but that's some great advice. And I think difficult question, super important, those brand differentiators, but I think your advice is perfect. Go ask your customers. And so for the emerging startup franchisors watching this, I challenge you right now, go attack your brand differentiators. If you're like 95% of all franchisors, they're inadequate. They're just generic. And take Brent's advice and really, find that unique feeling and advantage that your customers are seeing. That's great advice, Brent, and I'm going to apply that myself. So the third factor that Raintree looks at, or one of the factors, we talked about unit level economics, brand differentiators, and now it's a difficult topic. You're looking for validation, right? So you're looking for franchisees that are already in the system, that are happy with the decision they made, the support they're receiving, and their own unit level economics.
Absolutely. And so validation is kind of the third part, but it's also the checks and balances for everything else. And it encapsulates a lot more than that too. So by going straight to the franchisees, for sure, it's, are you making money? Do you feel the support's there? And that's a big one, right? That's the one, because I've already seen the P&Ls by this stage, by the time I'm speaking to the franchisees. And every brand says the same. Yeah, I've got a great marketing program in place to help franchisees when they need it. I've got a great operations program. The tech is good. Everyone says the same, but it's in validation you truly learn. Just like the point before, right, of what the brand competitive advantage is, or the quality of the product. The franchisee is the customer, and that truly tells us how strong that brand is, especially on the support side. So again, we're digging into the numbers. We're asking them specific questions on support, what they do for marketing, what they do for finding real estate, construction, all these big ticket items. And we're ticking off a lot of boxes along the way. But ultimately, the question that matters most, and anyone that's been in the franchise development space will tell you this, for a long time will tell you this. The most important question in validation is, would you do it again? And that tells you a lot. If the franchisee says, yes, I would absolutely do this again, it means it's a successful concept and they've done well with that owner. If the franchisee pauses and says, well, I don't know about that, then it's typically not the type of model we like to get excited about.
Brian, when you're going through the process and you're sharing the feedback you received with a franchisor, what are some surprises that come up for them? Plus, on a positive or negative?
Yeah, I think on the negative side, so these brands, they're their babies, right? As you know, Charles, you speak to them too. It's an actual baby to them. So any type of negative feedback is often a surprise. And I think that sometimes it's just because, like the last 2 points, they simply haven't asked the franchisee how they're feeling about certain things within their business. And so when we do ask those questions and we do give that feedback of what they say, it's often a surprise. And that could be anything. That could be from any part of the support program to any part of the training or onboarding program. So there's usually a few things there that make brands raise their eyes. On the positive side, I do think, especially in the last couple of years, and I don't know why this is, but a lot of brands are often pretty nervous about their economics and how they do stack up to other brands. And they know when they talk to someone at Raintree who does look at a lot of brands and has insight into to steal some terminology from you, Charles, to look under the hood. And we know what's under the hood of a lot of brands. I think that the franchisors are often surprised to hear that they've got really strong competitive economics. So I think there's some low self-esteem out there in terms of financials, but when we get in there and we help them understand where they're truly at, oftentimes that's a positive.
And then, Brent, the brands that don't have a franchisee yet, they just started, right? We know validation is important. Any tips on, you can't replace the validation you don't have, but tips on where they should be focused to sort of self-validate what's going on or really encourage that first group of franchisees?
Yeah, I like this question. We have a shared case study here, Charles. We both have a partner in Toastique.
Yes.
So we typically don't do this. But here's what I say. Sometimes it's smarter to bet on the jockey and not the horse. And the moment that I met Kyle and Brianna, the founders of Toastique, I knew that they had really strong skill sets. They were exceptional people. And so our advice to them was, I think they'd opened up one location and had really good success with it. And they were thinking about the second one. And our advice was, without franchisees, prove that replication by opening locations 2 and 3. And they went on to overachieve and opened up like 4 in a year or 2. But the fact that the second location, they were moving so quickly on that, and that came in with strong economics. And again, they had done all the work that we just talked about in this call. It worked. And so we set out a goal of, okay, let's find 6 franchises in the first year. We think that's a smart, achievable goal. They showed all the signs that the support was in place, that they were ready to grow that team, that they were ready to do this properly. And so we were both comfortable in pressing go. And I think we did like 38 in the first year when the goal was 6. And so, yeah, I think it can be done. But I think that you have to either, one, be prepared to reinvest in your own corporate locations and prove out replication that way, or make sure that you're listening to every single one of Charles's podcasts and taking notes and actually executing on it. Because if you're not, any franchise development company worth their salt like Raintree, they won't work with you.
Brent, it's always interesting, great conversations, because I didn't even expect this direction, and it's your advice is so on point, and your analogy of betting on the jockey and not the horse. It's so important for emerging brands to hear that. So often when people will ask, well, what does it take to succeed, or should I franchise? One analogy or one statement that I always make is I have two brands in the same industry. And actually maybe one, it doesn't matter, one performs better than the other. The brand that's going to win can be determined by the leadership team and the founder and their commitment to franchising, and more than anything else, learning franchising and adapting. And I'll also explain to them, when someone succeeds, everyone takes credit. And when someone fails, they blame the founders, right? And so I 100% agree. And yeah, Toustique's an amazing brand, amazing founders, great people, but they're a driving force in what's being done. What I also find interesting is not that Raintree can work with every brand. In fact, there's very few you can work with. But I love their mindset of focusing on growth and understanding that we need to work with specialists and a dedicated professional team. And that gets to their mindset that also led to more locations and their focus. So yeah, I think that's really good advice. I think every franchisor needs to know that, like, you're accountable for your success. And while you need amazing partners, you have to find them and also leverage their knowledge base and leverage their skills. So, and because this is a struggle that every startup franchisor has, right? They don't have franchisees, which gets to your original point. Go focus and mine the relationships you have and that organic reach of your brand.
Absolutely.
So, Brent, I'm a big fan of, or at least in my mind, outmaneuvering the competition, really scaling and growing as a franchisor. And I understand there's good advice out there about the budgets you need, but I've seen many Raintree brands bootstrap their growth, right, in a very strategic way. I've seen a number of our clients, not because of me, but because of the founders, where they focus on growth. All the advice you're mentioning, right? They launch, they learn franchising, they bring on organically some franchisees, they support them, good unit level economics, and then we keep growing. Budget ranges, I think, vary tremendously for startups and emerging. What's some advice you could give about budgeting? I mean, one, the fact that you probably should budget every year, set your franchise development budget, but what are some insights and strategies you'd recommend?
Yeah, so you're right. There's many schools of thought here. You'll hear some really smart people say 1 to 2 million is what you need to come in with a war chest for to do this properly. Then you'll hear all the way at the other end of the spectrum, you don't need anything really. You can get your first franchisee fee in and then start to use those funds. I've seen success, not so much from the lower end. Certainly seen brands grow that have gotten capital to that extent and do it all right. But I've seen brands bootstrap to a certain extent. And so there's a few things that go into that to doing that successfully. I think it's a little trickier than some brands might think. First and foremost, we sort of say, look, at least at Raintree, and this doesn't mean that you can't be successful, but we want to see you at least put in $150,000 for the marketing program alone in the first year. And ultimately, if you're doing what you need to do, if the model works and you're finding franchise owners, you should see that take care of itself in the first 6 months in terms of 5 or 6 franchisees in the door and setting franchise fees appropriately. But ultimately, so look, so what are you going to do with that 150,000? Then comes usually is question 2, right? Most FSOs out there, there's a handful, a few really, really good ones. Their strategy is ultimately to almost exclusively work with consultant networks. Now, there's the really good part about that strategy is there's not a lot of upfront capital needed for the marketing. Those leads come in, you pay a monthly fee to the consultant networks. Those leads come in and they're low risk leads. You pay on the commission if you do happen to close them. So that's all well and good, and we do support that, and we do rely on consultants, especially initially, to help us start to fill markets. with our brands. But ultimately, the way that would work is you would have to pay the consultant. Well, the way that works is you have to pay the consultant their referral fee. It's usually 50% plus, no less than 25, 30,000 is kind of the competitive rate right now. And then you have to pay the FSO, like a Raintree or whoever else you're using if you fall into that bucket, their percentage too, meaning that brands that go down that path and go the consultant only path, and usually the ones that actually work are with FSOs, like I said, you're not seeing any return on the franchise fee. It's all being paid out in commissions. So we believe a good approach is a balanced strategy where you use the consultant networks, you leverage them, but you also invest in digital side. You hedge your bets. And you'll have some deals come in where, you really only see 10% of the franchise fee. But hopefully, if you've done everything right in terms of your why now, all these things that you talk about and you coach on too, Charles, if that's all there, then they should start to see some traction on the digital side where you get to keep all or a big chunk of the franchise fee. And that's where the difference here we're getting to right now is the difference between being able to grow with a minimal budget versus the millions plus dollars war chest to do it and to grow and to start to hire your infrastructure with that. When you're doing some digital deals and you're keeping, 20, 40, 50, 60, 70,000 per deal go straight to your franchisor bottom line, that's almost a franchise support hire each time. And that's what we aim to achieve at Raintree. So again, for various reasons in terms of, we want to see at least on our end, an investment of 6,000 to 8,000 in marketing a month. And then, you've got your legal fees and ongoing this and that. That's why that $150,000 number comes into place. But again, I think if you can do that, work with some consultant networks, you should see actually a return on your franchise fee in the first year. And then how you grow from there is another discussion, but there's a variety of parts.
This is tangible advice, right? Which is very hard to get in the franchise industry. So I'm loving this. Brent, when you say 6,000 to 8,000 a month, that's what you're referring to is that $150,000 startup capital? Is that how it's deployed?
Yeah. And that obviously those don't line up, but you've got other costs, right? So 150 would cover things like discovery days, consultant trade shows, legal fees, a variety of other things that development needs for us to be successful. So that's where that number comes from.
Yeah. And what I love about the conversation, so we started off with seasoning the franchise offering, focusing on the organic reach of your brand, onboarding those first couple of franchisees that will ultimately become your validation, additional unit level economics. And now, Brent is giving tangible advice here. And I think at a very strategic level of $150K budget for marketing. And on top of this, I think so critical for franchisors is Brent is recommending a multi-pronged strategy, which is franchise consultants, but also digital and digital marketing. And I think it's so critical for a couple of reasons. Number one, if you're not ready for digital, your brand story, your website, your uniques, well, you're not going to be ready for the broker network either. Also, what I like about it is that you're building up, you said hedging your bets. I think that's genius, and I think it's smart, right? You should be building from different funnels, right? Brent, you've always said that broker network, selling to brokers, that's relationship building. So you build up that relationship building channel. And you're also building your digital channel. And along the way, it's really pressuring and forcing you to really make sure your brand story's on point and your uniques, right? If they're not, you may call your vendor or whoever's doing your marketing saying the marketing's not working or brokers are not selling. The reality is you're not doing the things you need to do for the marketing to work or brokers to sell. So 6,000 to 8,000 a month, digital, brokers. So on the digital front, what do you find to be effective, effective digital marketing channels that franchisors should be evaluating?
Yeah, we believe just like you should do some work with consultant networks and have a digital strategy, it's the same reasoning as which channels on the digital side. We believe an omni-channel approach is the best approach, because having a variety of channels, if you set them up properly, can feed each other and create a cyclical and a compound effect on the quality of your leads and your ability to convert them. So we try and spread it as best we can between generating what we call hunt mode franchise buyers. They're folks that are actively going online and entering into Google or some type of behavior to show I'm interested in purchasing a franchise. So those are things like Google and Bing PPC campaigns. They're things like franchise portals and getting listed on franchise directory sites. Obviously SEO and ensuring you've got an SEO program that's powering your franchise website. There are those things. And then what we like to do and what we see success in is then using other channels like social media, like Facebook and YouTube and Instagram retargeting, where you're pulling from your lead database and you're really trying to have all those folks that have either come to your website or submitted an inquiry. You try and extend the value of those just because they didn't convert and say they wanted to start the process that day. I think that's where a lot of brands fall off. I think there's a real value in spreading your channels out to focus not on just generation, but conversion later on. And so perhaps somebody went to a franchise portal and that day or time, it wasn't the right moment for them to start the process. But maybe a month or two later, they see a Facebook ad or a YouTube video that's been targeted to them and it reignites them to start the process then at a better time. We see a lot of success there. So my point is, don't just lump $6,000 to $8,000 into portals or into Facebook. Again, a good hedge your bet omni-channel approach will really allow you to understand where you're going to have more success, and ultimately will increase the value and the likelihood of you converting any of the leads that you generate.
Yeah, I love the framework. And what you're referring to is the compound effect of the quality of the leads. So retargeting, I didn't look at it from that perspective, but that makes sense, right? And then I think franchisors need to know, one day a franchisee reached a friction point and frustration, a candidate, they find your website or they reach out, and then things cool off the next day and maybe they're not thinking about franchise buying anymore. And so I think retargeting is key. And I love the distinction between hunt mode buyers. Brent, so I'm a franchisor. I'm not at a stage where I would qualify to work with a Raintree yet. I'm going to invest in digital. I'm going to invest in broker relations. On the digital end, what's some of the media I need to have ready to make digital effective?
Great question. And this answer also falls into what I was basically just talking about. So one of the things I think I see, and maybe a problem industry-wide, is we all as franchisors get so focused on this hot topic of lead generation. I've got to get leads in the door. I've got to spend on getting leads. I think where you'll find success is when you balance that focus and that budget as well between lead generation and lead conversion. And so even those marketing channels that I just mentioned, your retargeting ones, that's a conversion strategy. And so to answer that question you just asked, and what were some of the materials, I think for us, what we're highest on now, where we probably spend, I would say 10% of the franchise development budget in total, right, which is a big number, is actually video, because it's used to generate leads. It can be deployed at a very specific place in the funnel to better convert leads, to nurture leads. So video is a big one where you want to make sure that you've got all of the information your franchise prospects need in place. Video is great. Obviously, franchise website, you've got to spend the money there and make sure that, one, it's effective, two, that it's built for SEO so you can capture some leads. But we know that our prospects, our buyers, not our leads, but across Raintree brands, the buyers, they're going back to those sites 7, 8, 9, 10 times at least during the course of the discovery process. They're constantly going back and looking at it, maybe showing their family, friends. So you want to make sure you've put a good amount of time and invested in making sure it's as best as it can be. Email is being the stable tool. Texts come up and come down, social media's come up, come down. The phone's been effective and ineffective based on what Apple or providers have been doing, but email is a good place for you to spend time, either investing in copy or design or both, to make sure that all of your candidates understand what you're providing and why your brand is special. So, there's a lot, Charles, especially once you get into the tech side of the CRM and all these little pieces of collateral. Our brands specifically have 82 pieces of marketing collateral we start them off with. That's just the starting point for franchise development. So we could talk about 82 things, but I think, the big three top of mind for me would be video, strong website, and strong email campaigns. If you can do those three well, you're in a good spot.
Yeah, and I think it says a lot when you're spending 10% of the budget on video, right? And I especially for the startup brands, I'm like, your biggest story is your story as the founder, the transformation you experienced, and you need to tell that, right? Otherwise, I don't think a startup brand has any shot without video, or they shouldn't have any shot without video.
Especially in what we do, right? So selling a franchise, it's a highly emotional proposition, right? You're effectively asking the buyer, the customer, to, one, sign a 300-page legal agreement that's heavily weighted against them. Two, trust in these folks that you'll maybe meet at a discovery day and you'll get to spend a couple of hours with them. Trust that the next 10 years of your life and this investment are in good hands with them, these folks you barely know. And three, oh, by the way, in most cases, you've got to give me every dollar you've ever saved and maybe borrow a small fortune on top of that. And that's the reality of the buy. So like it or not, it becomes emotional. And the best way to appeal to somebody that's making a highly emotional decision, that's trying to really understand what they're getting into, is to that visual power of video. It's effective. And so for that reason, in what we're doing, especially I believe in the product or the product of franchising that we offer, video is critical.
And I think it forces a discipline too when these emerging franchisors are planning. If you're going to sit there and prepare a video for your website, you really need to touch on important things like those uniques that Brent was speaking about. Why you? Why now? All questions that you think you know the answers to. But once you put it on video, you realize we have to sit down a little more and do a deeper dive, which gets to your point earlier of a SWOT analysis, and then maybe even a deeper dive of speaking to customers, right? And really diving into what ultimately becomes what your brand's about or your brand story. So I think the video forces so many other positive things. Brent, I happen to think for emerging brands, video could help you outmaneuver competition and much more established companies if you leverage it the right way.
100%, especially, even if your established competitors are giant, they're big, they've got these advantages, bigger support teams, longer track record of financial history. Again, when it's an emotional decision and you are able to tell the story of how this brand helps owners change lives, improve lives, you can absolutely create a stronger offering by just taking the time to be thoughtful about making content that appeals to a franchise buyer and helping them understand how this particular franchise opportunity can solve the problem that they have. Whether that's I need more money, I need more time, I want legacy. Certainly, I've noticed that the bigger brands don't do that very well. Not at all, actually. And there's a giant opportunity there.
I definitely believe that. I think it's a big advantage. And then even those videos that are converting candidates are also videos that brokers are going to look at. So the other part of that strategy of the broker engagement, which Brent, we spoke earlier, and you did a great explanation with that also, which is, so we're focused on a compounding effect with digital. We're leveraging video. We're getting these wheels to spin. I think we both agree it's going to take time to build the relationships and gain traction with brokers. But if you could just share a little your perspective on what franchise brokers are going to be looking for and wanting to see in a new franchisor.
Yes, yeah, we talked about it at length today, and I think I was able to reflect on it a little bit. If I was to put it into 3 or 4 buckets of the things absolutely I would do again if I was starting out with consultants, which we do quite frequently, but the big thing is getting the referral fees right. That's where a lot of brands misstep. It's not cheap to work with consultants on the back end of a deal. The reality is to be competitive against the other 500 brands that are in that network, you need to have a single unit referral fee of probably no less than 25,000. The Raintree brands are all at about 30,000 on a single now. And that can be tough for franchisors to swallow, but the way that I explain it is, look, it's not so much a money grab by their end, and it's not so much, well, they should be showing my brand, which is a better quality over other brands who, even if I pay less, the reality is they are still taking on the risk of buying the leads that you want from them, and it's a business and they need to see an ROI, and they have real costs, and I understand why. Certainly some of them will want to make sure that referral fee is competitive. Otherwise, they may not lose out on the deal. So that's a big one, is making sure you're at a competitive referral fee. Then you've got to really focus on making sure that they truly understand the brand. And I think a lot of brands misstep here in that they think that maybe they can spend a little bit of time sending out a few initial emails, jumping on an initial webinar, hey, even calling a few. The reality is it's a war of attrition. It's a war of attention. You have to have a program in place where every single day you're doing something to ensure that the brokers know, firstly, you're still there in franchising. Secondly, every day is a new opportunity to educate them on one small part of the brand, whether that's one of the selling points, how the model works, customers, what the support team looks like. There's a million things that they want to know, and they can't just learn that from your one effort that you did when you launched with them. So what these things that we do are to give you something tangible there. We like to at least try and dial from our team, each of the directors and their teams try and dial at least 100 phone calls a week. We work with 1,500 consultants, but the power of the phone, I think, is overlooked, especially in the consultant world. Picking up the phone, asking questions. Do you understand the brand? What do you need from us for you to show it? And just building the relationship and getting to know them. That's a prolonged effort. Like I said, a war of attention. You've got to be willing to fight. Same thing on the house side or the digital side. Emails are great. Making sure you're sending those out every week at least. Any text campaigns. Using LinkedIn, finding the folks that you talk to on the phone, adding them on your LinkedIn, having them follow you. There's a million ways. I'm sure you all know how to market your own brands. You have to do the same thing with a consultant. You have to treat it like it's a separate business that you're trying to win. They become your customer, right? So you have to win that too. And that would be the second one. The third and final bucket I'll give you, Charles, is that, and we talked about this too. I think that sometimes, unfortunately, I talk to brands that are just not growing, and that's why they're reaching out to Raintree. But they've actually got a competitive referral fee in place. They've done a great job in educating the consultants and having all the materials, the videos. They've made the calls. They're doing the ongoing webinars. They're active on LinkedIn. They're really working hard, and they're doing that right. But they're still not getting any lead flow, and they're banging their head up against a wall. And oftentimes, when we dig in and we look, you'll find that the conversion rate overall from their sales personnel is low. And perhaps it can be that the consultants understand or suspect that they don't have a real closer in place. And back to the original point, when that consultant is spending anywhere from $100 to $1,000 a lead, you can understand why, if they've got concerns that your sales personnel aren't as skilled as others, maybe they don't want to risk that $100 or $1,000 lead on someone who may or may not be green or have the ability to get that great lead across the line. So being honest with yourself and understanding the strengths of your sales team can be the difference between getting a lot of lead flow from the consultants or getting none. And they would be the big three.
No, that's great advice. And what I think so many startup franchisors don't realize is that franchise brokers are operating a business, right? They're even buying leads, they're qualifying leads, they're spending time introducing them to brands. And so they have a significant cost, but more important, they're working so hard to qualify this lead, they need a franchisor that's going to put care into the process and help with the conversion. Brent, I feel like so many core things I feel like are secrets in the franchise industry, like you've shared with us, not in a way where people have a hard time talking about budgets and digital strategy and a candid conversation. So I love the advice you're sharing. And for anyone watching this video, by the way, Raintree is an amazing organization, amazing team that really helps brands grow. I mean, ironically, Brent can't work with most of the brands that are going to watch this video, or they're just not ready to be working with Raintree, although you should reach out to them. Brent, this is sort of a general question. I think this would be a great way to end off this video, because I do value what you guys put into franchising, the care you have with your franchisor clients, and really the organization you're building at Raintree, right? Amazing organization, doing good things and succeeding and winning. From your perspective as a CEO, your perspective as a leader in the franchise industry, and again, this is advice to an emerging franchisor. What should success feel like for them over time in franchising?
Wow, that's a great question. I think there's many variations of success that I see in brands we work with. Honestly, we'll take some. We've worked with brands that we've done 5, 6 deals with them when they struggled to do anything really in the years before, and that was success. Having 5 or 6 really strong, really great fitting franchisees. But then we've had brands where we're doing 100 new owners a year, and they go on to get acquired and get their happily ever after and everything in between. And I think ultimately, my advice would be don't get swept up in the ladder, though. Don't get swept up in the idea of I've got to get to this 1,000 units, or I've got to get it to 100 or 200 units and get a big check, or whatever the grandiose version could be. What you're going to do as a franchisor is something really special. And I think that, especially in going down that path a couple of times myself, certainly speaking to a lot of franchisors and franchise professionals that have far more experience than I do, and really trying to listen to them. As a franchisor, my message would be don't get caught up in the hysteria of deals awarded and PE checks and becoming the biggest and baddest. Of course, that has to be there. But what you do is really special, and you're going to change. You're not going to do it every time. I've never met a brand that's been perfect. But you're going to bring in franchisees. You're going to take them out of corporate America. You're going to provide them with a business model that's going to change the family's lives in some instances, whether that's financially or in terms of time and freedom. And my message would be to enjoy that ride, to understand exactly what you're doing, celebrate those real tangible wins like that, and realizing that this truly is a pretty special. It sounds corny, Charles.
No, this is right. This is what I live. Right. This is where the magic. This is really what matters. And we were talking with Mike, one of the founders, Mike McGrail, at Big B Coffee. And he teared up when he was talking about how one of their franchisees was exiting. She was selling her franchise, thought she was getting X and retiring, but she was getting X times 3 and didn't realize how profitable it was. And what I love about what you're explaining, I really do, is when it's done right there, and you use the term special, and I think there's no better way to say it. And I think the question for me matters because I think franchisors need to see this pathway. And I think your answer is perfect. Anything but corny.
Yeah, well, thank you. But I think that it's not spoken about enough. I'm glad to hear that you got one on video. But most franchisors I talk to are looking for legacy. That's why they're really, when you dig in and you're trying to get in their psychology, they're looking for legacy. And what's more important, a big check from a PE company or whatever it means at the end of a successful national run, or on your deathbed, are you going to remember specific faces of franchisees that tell you at their conference, you changed my life? And getting as many of those into the thought bank would be probably more meaningful, at least for me and a lot of the brands that I work with. And I think I too often skip that and may be missing out on some opportunities to be grateful and to enjoy how special this is. So that would be the advice.
I think it's a perfect way to end our discussion today. Brent, thank you so much.
Charles, thank you. Always a pleasure.